content, inspiring purpose. This executive series we put together, we didn't want people to think it's only for executives, but I think there are pieces of this that would, no matter what your leadership level is, will be relevant, whether it's leading in your family, your home, or leading an organization of 100,000 people. I think that some of the things will apply either way. So, inspiring purpose. So think about this for just a moment. When was the last time you felt inspired? When was the last time you felt inspired? Knowing me, if some of you know me, the question you should ask now is, what does it mean to be inspired? So we're going to go there. Inspiration, a breathing in or infusion of some idea, purpose in the mind, a suggestion, an awakening, or a creation of some feeling or impulse, and the last part, especially of an exalted kind. There's something to chew on, right? A breathing in or infusion of some idea or purpose into the mind, suggestion, an awakening, or creation of some feeling or impulse, especially of an exalted kind. It's interesting to think about the last time that you felt inspired as a starting place. But there's also another take on this. I had an executive call me several years ago, and it's one of those moments that I didn't forget because I think so many of us feel this. He called me. I know exactly where the parking lot I was sitting in. And he called me and he said, Rob, I got a question I really need an answer to today. How do you know when you've lost your team? Boom! Like, are any of you like, someone calls you and asks you, how do you know when you've lost your team? And I imagine if I could see all of your faces, some of you are thinking, I know exactly what he's asking. How do you know when I mean, I don't know if we know exactly what, like all kinds of things that could mean, but we felt that. How do we know when we've lost our team? And he was a person who he was managing people across the country virtually. This was probably, I think he called me probably 10, 12 years ago. So I don't even know if it was virtually, but he was managing people from a distance. And I could feel the pressure he felt about that question. So I bring that up because of this. This second question, I asked you, when was the last time you felt inspired? When was the last time you felt the challenge of creating that same condition in others? Of inspiring others. And so even when I looked at the title of this topic, inspiring purpose, you can think about it this way. Does that mean inspiring purpose in others? Or does it mean having an inspiring purpose that people are inspired by? And I want to suggest to you that it's both. Kind of makes it complicated, but I don't know how to deal with it any other way. I want to suggest that it's both. And that there's probably a third part, that it's what does inspiration look like for us? Here's my thesis. And Claire will document this, but here we go. Because it's fairly complex, but here we go. So I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag, and then I'll bring the cat back around and show you the cat again at the end. All right, so here we go. Here's the thesis. Inspiration requires both readiness and preparation. Inspiration requires both readiness, preparation, and for leaders, it is more about being inspired, and listen to this, creating the conditions for inspiration, than it is about being inspiring or having an inspiring purpose. And I'll unpack this, why the research suggests that this is true. So the idea, like, I need to be, like, let's just throw out some of the cultural manifestations of this that may not work. the idea that I need to be a charismatic leader. That's not what I was suggesting. I was suggesting is creating the conditions for inspiration as opposed to being inspiring. It's really interesting because I think so much of what we think about is like, how do I be inspiring? How do I communicate in an inspirational way? I'm not saying that's not important at all, but I would say that the research tells us something different. So let's get into inspiration. This is what some of the things that are out there that are kind of fascinating. And by the way, so inspiration is what I defined earlier. Here are some of the qualities of inspiration in people. And by the way, most of the time when if I'm talking to an executive, we believe very strongly in executives who practice what they preach. So like even when we use the WiLD toolkit across organizations, we rarely work with organizations where the senior leaders aren't using the process themselves. We got worn out by organizations where we were trying to develop all the other leaders and then look at the senior leaders and saying, aren't you leaders too? You know, and so instead of trying to push leader development, is like everyone should be involved in it. So if you want to inspire people to develop themselves, start developing yourself is where I'm going with that. So here are some of the qualities of inspiration. Listen to this. Evocation. Listen to this. Inspiration is evoked spontaneously, and this is from the research, and without intention. Now, I think that's overstated because of some of the other research around this, but it's oftentimes evoked spontaneously and without intention. However, this is the part where I want to be careful about the use of the word intention. Work mastery came before inspiration. So in other words, there was a preparatory climate that I was creating before I got inspired. And work mastery quite simply could mean you're just practicing your skill set or your practice. So just getting going and developing mastery in a skill set is where inspiration tends to surprise us. Does that make sense? So it's like, it's like the difference is look for inspiration is very different from start practicing your skill set and be open to it. So it's setting the conditions for inspiration to occur, not trying to just find it like it's hidden somewhere on the map. That would be one of the differences. Okay, the second thing. So, but I think what's interesting about inspiration is it does surprise us. It's kind of, it's spontaneous. It just like, whoa, there it was. It happened. Our WiLD team, last Monday and Tuesday, we did our strategy meeting for 2 days together. We had our leadership team together. I'm telling you, for Monday, most of Monday, and they'll all be nodding their heads, we fought. So, and we fight well, but it was mostly like doing our work, figuring out what have we done? What are we, like, what are the things that we have been practicing? What are the skill sets? What have we seen in the people we're working with? What have we seen there? And then I'm telling you, it came on, and you're kind of hoping it'll come. You were hoping for inspiration. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden we landed on something that all of us felt like we took a giant deep of breath of oxygen. And we were like, that's it. And then we spent Tuesday dialing in the inspiration. So it was just interesting how much we lived that. This was a week ago, Monday. The second thing, transcendence. Inspiration is also transcendent of our more self-serving concerns and limitations. Such transcendence often involves a moment of clarity and awareness of new possibilities. So it comes from beyond us, and typically it's not about us alone. So all the self-serving stuff. So it's not about like getting rich. It's not about just goal achievement or reaching your quota. It's something that transcends that, oftentimes including a sense of other. And so that's that connection to a broader purpose or calling, but it has that inspiration has a transcendent piece about it. And then the third thing is that what they call approach motivation. So listen to this. That's what's described as an individual striving to transmit, express, or actualize a new idea or vision. So inspiration typically leads to some action, a motivation to act. Okay, so that's what those are the 3 qualities of inspiration. Now listen to this. This is kind of cool. Here's some research on the predictors and the impacts of inspiration. This is kind of nutty. Openness to experience, which is a big 5 personality trait, was correlated with inspiration. But there was also research that found that not just openness to experience, which tends to be relatively stable over our lifetime, but developmental agency or readiness was also correlated. So there's a sense in which you can open yourself, you can create developmental agency and efficacy that would actually open up inspiration. So it's not just you either have it or you don't, but I would say that those of you who are very open to experience probably get inspired more often or more easily. That's one thing I would suggest. Listen to this, inspired individuals weren't more conscientious, which is also a big 5 personality trait. So it doesn't make us more conscientious, but what's been said in the research is that inspiration is, because of that, it's something that happens to us and is not willed. So does that make sense? Like, it's not something I can will, like it's the same thing about, you're not looking for it and trying to force it, but it's something that happens to us. All of a sudden, if we create the conditions, it happens. Inspired people do have a stronger drive to master their work, typically. Interesting. They also are less competitive in a positive sense. It's not about beating other people, because that's off the table now when it's inspiration. They have more intrinsic motivation, which has strong linkages to performance. So inspiration matters, is the point. It was not related to gaining agency or more resources. So in other words, like just getting more, inspiration won't do that. Inspiration is going to give you something way more transcendent than that. Now, here's another thing that's interesting. Being inspired to do something and being inspired by something are different things, but they're related. Okay, so like if everybody's like, well, is this going to make me do something? Yes, but the possibility of being inspired by something is powerful as well. And I'll get back to this in just a second. So what's also our goal as leaders, it's interesting, is first of all, let's think about our own inspiration, like what that means. Now with this concept of inspiring purpose, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on purpose. But I did create a little definition of inspired purpose anyway. And I said this: your specific and transcendent reason for being in this moment, season, or longer. So I was kind of putting them together. I'm like, your specific and transcendent reason for being in this moment, season, or longer is that inspiring kind of purpose. Now, here's a couple of things to think about based on all that stuff I just said. I'm going to give you now. I do have a list. Some of you who like lists, like the Rob, give me a list. I've got 2 lists for you, all right, for you to chew on and talk about. The first thing is this. These are some food for thought, and then I'm going to give you some questions to ask yourself, all right? And by the way, all of you know, I'm not the guy who says like, here are the rules. I've got it figured out, dialed in. The WiLD team is perfect about this, by the way. Now you figure it out for yourself. I'm just not that person. Like, this is something, by the way, I think anyone who's like that is ridiculous. So these are things that I think we continue to figure out together. And some of you send me notes, and I'm like, I learn as we go. This is just setting a frame for this. So, but there's some interesting things. So here's my list. Number 1, inspiration isn't decided, but it's also typically not an accident. It's not decided or found, but it's also not an accident. We don't choose it. It finds us as we seek mastery and we practice. We create, think about this. We create the preparatory moments of mastery. We start to do what we're trying to get better at with an openness to inspiration. Without becoming doers alone. What happens so much in our work is we start to do, and we just start to become this machine that starts to get it done. But what this means is where the intentionality is around remaining open to inspiration, being aware that as you practice, the inspiration will come. I got a guitar hanging on my wall. I'm a decent musician, not a great musician, but I will tell you that as I practice guitar, the inspiration to create actually does open up. And so if I make sure I see it that way is the point. Number 2, this is related to purpose. In order to inspire purpose, you must have a purpose. So one of the things, like there's a tool inside the toolkit called the Purposeful Goals Assessment. And sometimes leaders actually are like, man, this is hard work. Because they're just used to just setting goals and starting to go execute and get things done. And what we're working and giving them a structure for is an easier way for them to think about purpose, to dig deep and to think about. So in order to inspire purpose, you probably got to figure out and spend the moment to open up inspiration about what that purpose is my point. Number 3, it will not fit everyone. What I see happening is if we were clearer and openness to the inspiration about why we're here and setting the frame for that and working through that we might make better selection decisions earlier. So many leaders feel the pressure of everyone's got to feel inspired to be on purpose with what we're doing. And what it's highlighting is you may have hired people who were never aligned because you weren't clear in the first place. And that's so many of us deal with that. When I say you, I mean we. Like, it happens all the time. So if we were to think about that sooner, it could change some of those things, because not everyone's going to fit. It doesn't make them bad people or us bad people for not aligning with where they're going. But maybe if we were clearer about that earlier, it could help. Number 4, mindfulness and openness to inspiration is necessary. So, and this relates to number 5. So let me tie these two together. Our job is not to be inspirational, but to create the conditions for our own inspiration, and then to create the conditions for others to be inspired. Like it has to start with us. Start by opening ourselves up to the possibility that there's something to discover, there's something to see, there's something to surprise us as leaders, even in terms of purpose, and then create the conditions for others to be inspired. To do that same thing where people could have that openness. I mean, I could pick any member of the WiLD Leaders team that some of you know and tell you about the way we're attempting to do that for one another, is to have those moments where we're practicing our craft, whatever our skill set, or even our job as a part of the WiLD Leaders team, while intentionally remaining open to the deeper inspiration that might come from that. And the other thing that I'll say, I want to give you your questions to ask yourself, well, let me come back to that. Let me go to the questions. Y'all are full of grace and I love it. That's what I'm hoping. So here are the questions to ask yourself. Are we creating the conditions for inspiration to occur? And sometimes, by the way, I was thinking about my sons. If you have high school kids, you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, get a job. You need to get a job. And then they're like, I don't want to do that. I went and applied for this, and I don't want to go work there. I don't want to work at a sandwich shop or whatever. And what's interesting is they got to go practice somewhere in order to understand the inspiration of what they may or may not be inspired to do in a transcendent kind of way. So part of me is like creating the conditions. Part of that is just creating spaces for us to practice, but also to think intentionally, be open to possibilities that might come up. That's my number 2 things. Are you open to possibilities? Are you open to possibilities? Because that's one of the big predictors. It's not just openness to experience, it's also just its general openness and a readiness to learn. Number 3, are we in it for the long haul? I think what's interesting too, the inspiration in that definition feels very different from motivation. Our motivation might ebb and flow, and even the inspiration of our teams might ebb and flow, but this is bigger than that. There are moments where we might not feel inspired. There might be moments, by the way, where we're exhausted from inspiration. It's like, let's just work for a while, Are we in it for the long haul? Number 4, as a leader, do we have a cadence of purpose, inspiration, and repeating that cycle? It's one of the things that's common in the literature that the WiLD team has been very gracious to make sure to give me is my moment, because it's one of the things I'm driven by is I need to be inspired myself. And so I need spaces to do that. And so it's part of our work rhythm is to do that. As a leader, do you have a cadence for that openness? Number 5, does your purpose and inspiration surprise you? That's one of the key definitions of this, where anybody that goes like, if it becomes rote, it's probably not inspiring anymore. Does it surprise you? Does it encourage other people? And number 6, does your purpose have openness for others to connect their own story to it? It's one of the things that's interesting. Like we did as a WiLD team, we'll put our mission statement up and say like, so how do each of us connect into that mission? So that inspiration, people can have their own story and narrative connected to it, which in most cases, people will find it, as opposed to trying to force them, like, everyone's got to believe in this. Is a different way of thinking about it. So as I said before, inspiration requires both readiness and preparation. And for leaders, it's more about being inspired and creating the conditions for inspiration than it is about being inspiring or having an inspiring purpose. The inspiration flows from our own inspiration. And so that's some food for thought, y'all. Looking forward to let's get smarter together.